This is Leadership Beyond, your community of conversation.
But this is the first time in my professional career that everybody, 100% of us, are consciously aware we are engaged in the change initiative.
Yeah, everything. I mean, COVID caused us all to go through change, right? At the same time, but our experiences were so different.
Facing these unprecedented times in isolation is pure insanity. Joining us today is Dr. Nadya Zhexembayva. And Nadya is going to help us to understand reinvention at the personal level, organizational level, and even global level.
During our conversation, Nadya outlines a wonderful model and process for reinventing, and at the same time acknowledges that orderly fashion outlined in the model is ideal and might not be realistic. It's much messier than that in practice. She shares insight on how to do it anyway in the messy world we live in and operate in.
Welcome to Nadya. Good morning, Nadya. Thanks for joining us.
It's my honor to be here.
Well, just to begin, tell us a little bit about your background leading us to your work today.
Well, I was born in the Soviet Union. I was born into multi-ethnic family. Both of my parents are mixed ethnicity, which means you have to be very attuned to different stories. You have to be attuned to the stories of each ethnicity and how it weaves in the pattern that became our society. And on both of my sides are two big groups that have suffered incredible losses in the last 100 years. So Kazakhstan went through an artificial famine at the same time as my Ukrainian part of the family went through the artificial famine. The same exact methods were used in two regions to control the population. In the case of Kazakhstan, 40% of all the Kazakh population was murdered. And in case of Ukraine, it's validated about 4 million and most likely more.
Well, so you've been aware of what many of us are just recently becoming aware of. So the very first question is, are you noticing that a lot of people are getting frozen by seeing the things out of their control?
Yes, and I think that applies whether you are in the middle of a very difficult, violent situation, and that applies not only the war in Ukraine, but of course, the horrific situation in Yemen, the ongoing fights all over the world, the leftovers of a horrific 20-year war in Afghanistan, and on and on and on. There are many, many places around the world that are going through very, very painful process. But that applies also in everyday life. You have a new boss, you got a new competitor, you got news of something happening in your family. And the freeze is a pretty standard reaction. It's one of the standard options that our nervous system automatically reverts to when it's faced with tremendous disruption.
So fight, flight, freeze?
Yes, and for me, I'm in a classic training, so I consider freeze one of the flight responses. It just, if you cannot physically run away, you run away here. And I noticed that in the corporate setting a lot, that people have mortgages and responsibilities and so on, so they cannot get up and quit, even though we all know that in the past year, the Great Resignation got over the edge and people just said, I don't care what happens to my mortgage, I'm out. This whole long story of not putting people first, knowing your work and your commitment to put people's first idea, that was not in place for generations, and we are all fed up with it. But some have to stay because they need to feed their kids, they need to carry on responsibilities, and they need to be adults. And then they flight right here. They freeze in the meetings, you know that they're already out of the discussion, they're already on their phone, or they're making mental lists for the weekend, they're done.
I see that plenty of times in a lot of the organizational change management work that I do, right? Where you have just the resistance to the change that's being brought upon, and there's really, like you said, there's three options. There's someone who's on board.
Mhm.
Sure, this will be a good thing. Whether they say it and mean it or say it and don't mean it, we
Right.
find out in their behavior. Or the second is that they are visibly resistant to it, or they're passively resistant to it, where they just shut down.
Yes.
Right. And I think that starts getting into just being a very disruptive work environment. And the change management work that we do is intentionally coming in to disrupt, right? With a purpose. We're disrupting with a purpose. There's an end goal. And what I see is that that's the one disruption. And too many times we're not paying attention to the other disruptions that are happening either within the company or with the people in the company. And so we come in with our blinders, and like me as a consultant, I'm brought in intentionally with blinders, right? You focus on this body of work, but then I see all the other things that are happening to the people because the work is focused on the people. And so what happens when we're looking at a change in these silos without, seemingly orderly change because we're managing,
Yes.
but all these other changes are not being managed. And then what happens?
Could look at change as a project, as an isolated, time-bound project with a beginning and the end. And it was juxtaposed against a relatively stable environment in the company. I started my career in the 90s selling insurance after the collapse of Soviet Union. And I still remember the time where we could have a 3-year fixed price contract with our suppliers. Nobody can guarantee fixed price right now for 3 years. Nobody would be crazy enough to say, okay, I promise you, this is the fixed price. Everyone is now working with flexible formulas. Depending on what's happening, this is what we will actually charge you. So at the time where the overall corporate environment was relatively stable sales, stable marketing, stable operations with a total quality management and all other stable environments, change could be treated as a project. And if you remember the classics, the unfreeze, change, refreeze, and other stage theories, they are all project-based. Great, very important, not to, criticize or attack. It was amazing. It was a breakthrough. It was very relevant. It was necessary. And it was a huge win for us in the world. And it's time for us to rethink some of those assumptions because the cycle is shrinking rapidly. We just started our 2022 Global Reinvention Survey. We measure the speed of change every 2 years. So I don't have data for this year. It's just first 200 people who participated, and we need a few thousands. But I do know that in 2020, the median life cycle of business, including mining and metals and oil and some of the longest cycle businesses, median was 6. And 60% of companies reported they need to reinvent every 3 years or less. That means change is a process. That means we can no longer isolate it as a thing we do over here while everything.
We did that change thing last year.
Exactly. Remember,
That's
Tom,
right.
just say a few words about how you went through that.
Well, I don't have to go any further back than COVID, where most of my business was classroom training.
Mm-hmm.
And what's interesting, in the beginning of this conversation, we talked about we could see these trends bubbling up. Everything was going hybrid and digital slowly. Mm-hmm. So someday I'll get that course online, someday, because you think you can kind of piecemeal put it in, and then boom, no classroom training.
Yes.
And so those that did the reinvention, I partner with Blanchard Company, they saw it and invested in it. They had research and development. So they were ahead of everybody else in having ready to go classes. So they reinvented themselves before pandemic, and it gives them an edge. So that's just one example. But in my personal life, I can come up with a lot. So I want to get to one of the core ideas in your wonderful handbook, which is, what is a chief reinvention officer?
Sure. So it connects to this discussion on change is no longer a project, change is a process. And as a process, it requires dedicated resource. It requires thoughtful improvement of process, not just we created a process one
And
time.
space.
And it requires space, it requires budget. Let's be very pragmatic. If you are not putting your money where your mouth is, all of this
Guilty is charged.
So it requires a budget, it requires time and space, it requires accountability and responsibility, and it requires dedicated resource. When we had very rare instances of change, so the big dot-com boom of 90s, that was one relatively rare instance of change in the context of the previous 20 years or 30 years of business. You could treat it as a project, and you could put aside a project management team and allocate a budget for them and move on. Today, when change is a weekly thing, you have to have a process that not only responds, because as you were just pointing out about Blanchard Company, by the time it's time to respond, it's too late. You need to be proactive. You need to be preventative. And we speak about 3 areas that are the first front line. There's 7 areas, but 7 pillars of reinvention as a system, but 3 are the kind of the no-brainer: anticipating change, designing change, and implementing change. And those are the 3 primary responsibilities of a Chief Reinvention Officer: creating a repetitive, high-quality process for anticipating change, creating a repetitive, high-quality process for designing change, and doing the same for implementation of change, so that when change hits, you're already prepared and you have a process and nobody is frozen and disoriented. What do we do? And you're not losing valuable time to respond, to have a rapid and agile reaction at the strategy and company level, not at the individual project level. So that's the role of Chief Reinvention Officers. And we're happy to see that many of our graduates are becoming Chief Reinvention Officers, even in a relatively large corporation. I think the largest we have so far is approaching $500 million in sales a year. So bigger corporations are coming, and there's different names for it. Chief Transformation Officer, sometimes Chief Strategy Officer assumes the role that includes both design and implementation. There's some different movements, but it's coming across the board.
So the mindset is that change is happening and we are going to be change agents. And then you adopt from that mindset and heart set a proven process that guides you on that path.
Yes. So the first and fundamental thing we have to change is go from change is relatively rare to change is nonstop. And the moment you truly understand that, you understand that most of things we've developed in management and leadership theory are no longer helpful. Things across different functions. I always use the example of just-in-time management that comes from supply chain and operations. This idea that you do not hold inventory either at the supply level or at the delivery level. You produce everything just in time. Great idea in the stable times. Great. When you're in a constantly disrupted world, if you don't have some inventory, you will be constantly without parts and your whole production will be stopped. So
anticipation, right?
Yes.
It's being able to at least semi-accurately anticipate where that future demand will be, like toilet paper in the pandemic.
Absolutely.
We were all scrambling.
Absolutely. Adrian, we interrupted you at some point earlier.
I interrupted you. Go ahead with your question.
No, it's fine. It's good dialogue. My question was, out of anticipate change, design change, implement change, it's that anticipate change that's the new, and I would argue the most challenging and the piece that requires the most focus, right? It's almost easy. I mean, not easy, but you can create a way to design change. You can create a method to implement change. How do you go about anticipating change with some accuracy?
Mm-hmm. So there are many good examples. The important thing is that essentially we already have all the pieces. We just never put them together in a system. If you think about different fields, especially the hot new professions, including analytics and on, foresight, future search, the whole field of strategy in a conceptual way. Maybe the tools are no longer the most adaptive ones, but the beliefs and the approaches in terms of forecasting are very important. So we have pieces there. Design change. We have plenty from change management methodology, but we also have design thinking. We also have some of the bridge between design and implement in the lean startup application to the corporate world, in the Agile and Scrum philosophies, and on and on and on. We have the pieces. The problem is that those pieces don't talk to each other and they don't respect each other. I'm tired of sitting in the meetings where strategy people are make fun of the softies in the change part, or the change people are saying all those horrible strategy people are only looking at numbers. This either or, and then not to offend the design thinking, innovation, and startup world, they are sitting aside and kind of making fun of everyone else. I'm generalizing, please don't take it personally. If you're listening, huge respect for every profession. We have to learn how to respect each other and also how to work in a cohesive fashion. So we're essentially passing a baton to each other so that we have a process where each part is integrated with the previous part.
Yeah, it's a holistic process. It's about, we have a culture of expertise, but if there is no bridge between the expertise, you've got cogs, no matter how brilliant they are, and no cog can run the machine.
Absolutely. So I'll give you an example of potential integrations. One example is Lego. Lego is the most respected toy brand in the world every year for 5 years running now, since 2017. And Lego uses their community as a means for anticipating change. As one-off, of course, it's not the only one, but over 1 million adults are part of a special platform where they are submitting trends and directions, and there is a communal vote around every idea or every suggestion. And before moving to the next stage, you need to reach a particular number of votes. So there is an actual thoughtful process of how do we separate signal from the noise? How do we know that this is a relatively relevant information versus this is just a whole bunch of random noise? And that also converts into the steps after the anticipation. So once the idea or the trend or a suggestion is upvoted to the right number of votes, there is a process of what happens with it next, how it becomes an actual product. That's exactly how Lego produced Lego Serious Play, which is their application for change management consultants, trainers, and business educators using Lego in a business training environment. It came from that community. It was not a product of their own R&D. This is an example of how we can do things if we start thinking about whole system and we stop fighting each other and saying, I'm the most important one here. Every single part of this puzzle needs to be put together. And the most important thing, it's like most of our current professions. So if you think about the field of finance, the finance as a field developed since Greek and Roman times, and at different times we invented different things until in the 20th century finance became the umbrella field for a whole bunch of different specialties, including accounting, including treasury, including many other things. And in the case of Reinvention, we are becoming the platform for many different fields and connecting them across the board.
So let's talk about a little bit about, like, I want to bring all of those concepts down to the individual.
Yeah.
You know, so and of course we need the scale at the organizational perspective, but I imagine that this can also be applied to either a smaller team within an organization where you might not have control of some of those, you know, other things that are happening, those bigger strategic moves that are happening, but you do control your specific team. or your family, or you yourself as, you know, an employee, a member of the community, a member of your own family? How do we scale it down?
It took us a while. My professional background, my doctorate is in organizational behavior, but as you know, organizational behavior covers everything from one person to the largest system possible. So I'm on the scale of large system. That's what I studied my whole life. And it took me some years to come down to, okay, do I even understand anything about the level of individual or team dynamics? And we finally have tools that help you bring it down. So for example, one of the most important pieces of work we've done is around the concept of Titanic Syndrome. This disease, this corporate or individual disease that takes place when we bring about our own downfall because of our own arrogance about where we are and our capabilities, because of our own attachment to the past successes, best practices, and the status quo, and because of simple inability to see and respond to emergent realities.
Or fear also of the uncertain.
Absolutely.
So it could be arrogance, or it just could be fear that shows up as arrogance because we don't know how.
Arrogance on its own does not exist. Arrogance is just a fear covered up. You can have a very reactive response to fear or very proactive demonstration of fear. And when you are really not fearful, you don't need to be arrogant. So arrogance is always.
Thank you for that. Carry on with your flow. I interrupted.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm absolutely with you that arrogance is just a very aggressive form of fear. But when we are talking about Titanic Syndrome, our first tests, and we've updated that test based on the best practice, best science we could find, it's testing you in those three areas: anticipating change, designing change, and implementing change. But only this year, we've created a same version of the test for the individual level. So how personally are you ready to react to potential iceberg, notice it on time, adapt your personal strategy, and actually implement those changes so that you are not, hitting the iceberg and only then responding. And yes, there are simple practices. Number one, start talking to people you don't like to talk to. That's the easiest thing to do in terms of anticipating change, because we all are isolated in our bubbles. It's also noticeable in the personal and political life, because we've become so isolated. So we just read people we like, follow people we like. The problem with that is that you cannot see the potential iceberg coming, or storm, or earthquake, or whatever else, metaphorically speaking, in your business. So start talking and getting resources, getting input from resources you don't normally get. On the design things is just having a time to process and develop a few potential directions, so few tests in your business, just regularly in your own career. Test it out. My daughter is starting college in the summer, and she's, Mom, what do I choose as a major? And I'm like, test it out. I mean, go from class to class. You have time. You don't need to declare major for at least most colleges 2 years. So test it out. Who knows? Maybe this is not your thing at all. So give you time to follow a couple of different trajectories before collapsing it into one and becoming a victim of your own choice.
So from that, I hear objectivity, right? Find a way to stay objective, and that's in who you're talking to, and allow time for reflection, right? Objective, and be objective and be reflective, I guess, as an individual. And so often we don't make time for that because we're hustling, right?
Absolutely.
Right. And Tom and I talk about this a lot in the work that we do with the power of the pause, just that time for reflection and to gain clarity. And I think, it's that communication. And Tom, this comes up almost every conversation we have, I feel like, where this is the powerful thing and we're just bad at it as people, right? As humans.
Yeah. I would like to add something it's not an addition, but you say talk to people you don't want to talk to. And I would say in your reflection, and as a coach, I work on this, talk to those voices inside that you don't want to admit are there.
Yeah.
And so a lot of times when I work with successful people, it's the inner critic. And the inner critic helped her to be as successful as she is by prodding her to do better. But how good is good enough? For the inner critic, never.
Yes.
So you don't want to kick the inner critic off the bus, but you want to listen and engage her and then reframe it so that her voice isn't driving the bus. Because when the inner critic drives the bus, it will drive it to death, because never satisfied. And that's what makes it a powerful voice. So talk to people that you aren't comfortable talking to, but also when you pause, you will see things you don't want to admit are in you. And this is only true of 100% of the human beings I've met so far. We have inner voices. We'd prefer they didn't exist. Like, I don't do jealousy. Well, there's a voice saying you're jealous. So let's just tell the truth about it. It's not who you are, but it's part of you.
I love that. To add a pragmatic twist to this. So I often come to listen to podcasters, read articles, see documentaries, look at the breakdowns of positions that I'm actively in the rejections of. And it takes a second to remind myself and to remind also my listeners on a regular basis. As you're listening to me, I'm not claiming the truth. Truth is way too multidimensional. I'm asking you to pause and not allow yourself to say yes or no. Yes or no is the moment we stop the inquiry. This is automatic end of a conversation. Just put a pause between the impulse and response. It's not here to say yes or no. Very often I come to actually find the opposite, but I'm listening with a double check of my own assumptions, with a, can I practice different points of view in different perspectives? So it's not coming in to say yes or no. You don't need to say yes, neither do you need to say no. It's more asking yourself, what is this information offers me that I can use as a generative, as a productive tool, as a productive resource? What can I take here? What can I use here to upgrade myself, essentially? It's not about yes or no, but how can I use it? Not is it good or bad, but how can I use this particular commentary, tool, report, or whatever else? And this personal practice before starting something, you don't need to say yes, you don't need to say no. Really, really helps when I'm listening to some of the more difficult authors that I'm already like on my horse, ready to attack.
That's wonderful. Not only pragmatic, it breaks it down into something I can do within the next day. Is not go to my go-to sources all the time, go someplace that I'm aware of them and I had some rejection for whatever reason, and really listen and just say, what is it I can gain from this? Be curious and not be judgmental. And that's small enough that I can do it. Thank you for that. So we've changed the global level, and now right what Adrian brought us right down to the runway and everywhere in between.
Yeah. And I think that it's that reflection, if in looking that again, that objectivity where we can, I bet almost always you can find something in there that is a truth you can accept, right? Yes. It might not be the whole thing, but probably there's, if you look with an open mind and really just seek to understand another's perspective and point of view, there's something there. And that, that makes me think of just conflict management kind of practices, right? Where find the common ground. Almost always it might be very tiny piece of footprint that's common, but is there something there that, and that just broadens your mind and then helps you to make better decisions, because if nothing else, you're understanding an opposer's point of view.
Let me illustrate it with two little pieces. Every few months, we host a 5-day, it's a free event. It's a virtual gathering, and usually about 500 to 1,000 people, all professionals all over the world participate. It's called Easy Reinvention Lab. And every day we do 1 hour together and we do one tool. And every lab, I ask people to post their reflections every day. And of course, on the first of the day, nobody posts. They're like, yeah, I've done it. I don't need to post. And I spent this long time with my spiel around the fact that we do not learn from experience. If you think you just had an experience, so you listened to an hour session, you got the tool, you did the tool, great. You think you learn from experience. If that was the case, we would never repeat our past mistakes. We do not learn from experience. We learn from reflecting on our experience. If we just experience something and we didn't reflect and extract the lessons and change our life based on that extraction, we have not learned anything. We'll just keep repeating the same thing and same thing and same thing. So reflection is the method of learning. The experience itself is not. Even though, of course, we had these breakthroughs around experiential learning only happens when reflection happens. And once you are doing the reflection, you are able to structure the lessons and integrate them differently and create the new versions of reality. So I'll give you an example of an experience and the reflection of experience, which if the reflection never happened and I haven't spoken about it, it would be completely lost opportunity. But I share this story from time to time. I and my family, we lived in Europe for almost 10 years. We lived on the border with Italy and Austria and Slovenia, and it was about 2 hours drive to Venice. So on a regular basis, we would take our family, friends, business partners to Venice as a part of them visiting us and just show things around. It was very normal part of our tradition. And when my daughter was about 5 or 6, is when we first took her with us. Usually it was just adults. So the first time we have a child with us, we're doing our regular thing. We're walking through the streets we love. We are canals, these beautiful places. And after a few hours, we sit down to have a coffee or hot chocolate. And we all go around the circle with the question of what did you remember the most? What was the kind of highlight of the day? And it gets to my daughter. And I say, so Lila, what was the thing you remembered the most? And she says, but. And I'm like, what do you mean? What? And we keep asking her in her child language. She explains that she's very short and the streets are very narrow and very packed with people. So while we are exploring the city, most of what she sees for hours is a butt of a person next to her. So we are there.
That's her perspective, right? That's
her perspective. It's her truth.
Right.
A true story and a great metaphor.
Absolutely. And if I had never taken time to reflect on that experience, a whole bunch of things would be lost to me. Because I do this as a reinvention professionals, entering companies, as you guys do, Adrian, Tom, both of you come to companies to reinvent, to change, to transform. I come in selling Venice. I come in showing the architecture of how beautiful the world will be. I come in with this glorious experience. And what do people see in the company? Butts.
Yeah.
And it's not because they are resistant or sabotaging or because they are vicious or they're unprofessional or they're lazy or whatever other story we tell ourselves. She saw butts because her angle is quite different from mine.
Yes.
So having the deepest respect for the fact that absolute majority of us, unless we are in psychiatric situation, wake up with a desire to live a meaningful life. Even those we really, really don't like and really, really disagree. With exception of psychiatric situation, most of us wake up and want to have a sense of meaning and dignity and the sense that I mattered. And whatever they're doing is their best versions of that yearning, even if we don't like that version. So when I think about Lila, she was not even funny. We were laughing our butts off. She was not funny. She was very matter of fact. Like, I've seen this color and this color. People are wearing this. Like, she had data. She had butt data because she's seen literally hundreds of them. So she just described different things she's seen the way we describe buildings. But that's the respect that we need to have. And the fact that it never even crossed our mind when we dragged that poor child to walk with us 4 hours, just didn't even cross our minds that she might not enjoy it at all. Because it's a completely different angle and a height and reality and all of it for it. So again, that was a real experience. But if we didn't take time to reflect on it and share and build it into a lesson learned, that experience would just disappear. It would be something in our memory that happened and so on.
It wouldn't have made it to this conversation.
Would never make it to this.
And we all valued from it. Well,
And if you
speaking
never
of the
asked the
experience,
question,
oh, go ahead,
If
Adrienne.
you never asked the question, you would have not learned of her perspective to then next time going to Venice, say, let me put you in this position. So now you can see the beautiful architecture. Oh, it's not a but, it's a beautiful building. Right. And so often that's what we need to do as change leaders coming in, is just look this way, right? Look this way instead of the way you're always looking.
And you're absolutely right. We have to start with questions. I think that's one of the biggest things that I see, because we're so eager to both do good, but also to show our value, that we come in with answers, and taking time before a single answer and single, I think we should do that, or this is my proposal, having time to ask, what do you see? What sticks out? What's happening for you? Suddenly you're like, oh my God, this is not Venice, I thought, right? And then you can adapt and do something with it. Tom, now we interrupted you.
Oh, I just want to say that experiences help us decide whether we want to reflect and build on the experience. And I participated in the Reinvention lab, and every morning I woke up with enthusiasm to get a shot of Dr. Nadya and that wonderful Reinvention community. So we highly recommend that experience. But you're right, if we just said we did that and check it off, and I'm seeking, and this is one step in that process, and the book as well, new ways to build on that experience and learn from it and reflect and apply it to my life. So thank you for that. It blessed my socks off.
Put all those in the notes, the Academy session and your book link. Like,
absolutely.
What a wonderful handbook, right? It's not sit down and read this. I love the way it's formatted.
Yeah. We had a big fight with the publishers. We had every single publisher said to us, we're not going to publish a colored book with a lot of workbooks and pictures. So we self-published it then, because we just couldn't find anyone who would believe in our vision.
Well,
we just said we will finance it ourselves and self-publish. But you can download the free 87-page preview, and we'll put it in show notes. And the Easy Reinvention Lab happens every few months. I think the next one is April, and there's something in June. There's always one coming up. So wherever you're listening to this amazing podcast, you will find a lab that is open for registrations. It's always free. It's always online. It's always super flexible, and it's also a lot of fun.
So please do send us all the links you would like in the show notes, because I might miss one. But I also would like to thank you for joining us, leave you with just an open-ended question. So if you wanted to leave our listeners with one thing, what would that be?
Well, I probably would answer this question very differently just a few weeks ago, but we are tomorrow at the 3rd week of the war in Ukraine. And because I come from the Soviet Union, where we had a lot of common history, it hits home differently, which reminds me of my last visit to Aspen, Colorado, where the largest, or one of the largest living organism lives, which is the aspen itself. Aspen as a tree, as many of you know, is not a tree. It's a common root between thousands and sometimes tens of thousands of trees. And the unique thing about aspen as a tree is that, unlike many other trees that do photosynthesis using leaves only, so in the winter when the leaves fall, there is no energy for life generated, and there is a hibernation. Aspen is able to produce energy for life using its bark. So during winter, it's absorbing the light and putting that energy in the roots so that when the spring comes, the new tree grows out of a common root. And as we are thinking about change, whether it's change at your individual level, and you are not alone, you have family members, friends, your little ecosystem. Little, I don't mean it in a diminutive way, I compare to the universe. And then your team, your company, your department, your business unit, your town, your country, and the world at large. We all have one common tree. We have one root. We're not separate trees, even if visually it looks like we are. So if we start with that understanding, if we think of ourselves as an aspen, then we are able to find in ourselves an ability to listen to the other and deeply honor them, even if we really actively disagree with them. And that would be my message today.
Wow, you just blessed my socks off, and I
have
ask your
goosebumps,
permission
Nadya.
to post that story today. Of course, I will attribute where
beautiful.
it came from, but that's a powerful, powerful truth.
Mhm.
Thank you so much for
Thank you
making
for
space
joining
for
us.
us.
Thank you. It's an honor to be with you. Adrian, wonderful to meet you. Of course, Tom and I
Likewise.
had a chance to connect before. Please let me know how I can support you. Of course, Olga will post and all of that we do. And we try to do also from time to time emails with like here's the 3 podcasts from the last month or last 2 months. So
We'll just tell Olga whatever she sends us, we'll go in the show notes. I already have a photo of you, but maybe a good JPEG of this phenomenal book. It never shows up. I have to remember.
We of course have it. We have it in many different formats. So we'll
Yeah.
find
So send me what you would like to be put up there in the show notes, and we will put it up there. I did solve one practical problem, which was there was a debate in your community about, do we actually use those cards? They're so beautiful, or do we keep them in the book? And the solution was very simple, which is you get one copy that you don't highlight and is just as a reference, and one that you scribble on and tear out the note card. So I was glad to.
I like that. That helps us a lot, because then everyone needs 2 copies. But
because one gentleman just said, I can't write on this book. It's so beautiful.
Yeah,
but
I
yet
still
want
have
it to
mine.
be a worksheet.
Yep.
I
got
still have
tabs on mine too.
But of course, I
Yeah,
use the cards in other formats. So I use the cards also virtually. We've created them virtually for our team on Miro. So we move the cards around.
There's lots of different solutions, but I just found that debate interesting. There's more
like
than
that.
one way to solve it. It's like, I
Yes,
just don't
I
want to
love
touch this sacred book, but it's a workbook, so I got to touch it. And I just get 2.
There you go.
Thank you
You
so
might
much.
have to go through the exercises more than once, right? It's practice.
Yeah.
And you will get different answers. The surprising.
Oh,
So
absolutely. I would get a different answer today by far than before. So
very nice to meet you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so
Love
much.
it. Lovely to connect. If we can do anything else in the future, let us know.
we will stay connected. That I promise.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to the Leadership Beyond podcast. We hope you benefited from this conversation as much as we have. We invite you to join our community of conversation. Subscribe to our podcast on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Don't forget to sign up at aleadershipbeyond.com for free materials and updates. That's aleadershipbeyond.com. Join us in 2 weeks for our next episode.